Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm glad to have John Rubino with me, a former financial analyst on the street for two different companies and concerns, and also written a number of books. We're going to make sure he runs through the titles. I think it's five books in the financial space. And Death of the Dollar, a business that he sold and now on Substack as John Rubino. Let me go check on the left there, Rubino Substack. So don't forget to check him out. We'll put those details again, and you'll get one more chance to hear them. But John, welcome. First of all, nice to have you.
Hey, Francis, it's good to meet you.
And second of all, and I suppose a nice loosener question, we've seen a little bit of gold going up. We've obviously got Bitcoin going up. We've had some interesting times in the debt markets in the last year or two. Um, Give us your take on, state of the nation address, John Rubino style, on the financial side. Let's hear it.
Yeah, we can do this in like three sentences. We are in the blow-off stage of the most epic credit supercycle in the history of the human race. We're doing things right now that are just would have been inconceivable in just a few years ago. In the US, we're taking on $1 trillion of new debt every 100 days. And obviously that's unsustainable, but that's where we are now, and that's the kind of thing that happens right at the end of cycles before everything blows up.
Well, as you said, it's pretty succinct, but hard hitting nonetheless. And I suppose the big game is there's many people that have recognized that this is coming and it's getting more acute. So we used to be the fringe media people that spoke like you and I, and now we're no longer saying controversial new things. But the big question is, what do the people watching, I suppose, and listening to all of this actually do to preserve themselves from the blowback that is almost inevitability. I had Bill Holter on as also, and he says it's a mathematical guarantee. It's beyond a fait accompli. Oh, that rhymed. I must hang on to that one. But in essence, it's going to happen, and it can't be too far off as well. How and where do you start with giving guidance on a non-financial basis to people watching?
Well, that's actually the subject of my Substack newsletter. It's about actionable stuff um, to prepare for what's going to be a really tumultuous decade. And there's a wide spectrum of things you should do. And the interesting thing about it is that most of what we should be doing right now falls under the heading of prepping. Old style prepping. Get a garden, grow your own food, invest in gold and silver, learn how to use a gun, become extremely handy because it's not going to be necessarily easy to get repairmen to come out and fix your stuff, things like that. And all of it applies to what's coming. And,
Mm.
as a finance nerd, I'm focused especially on how you invest for a gigantic financial crisis because the big systems that have made life so easy since the 1970s, let's say, when we went off the gold standard and adopted fiat currencies around the world. Those things are ending. That experiment didn't work. And the system as we know it now has to break down and has to be replaced by something else. And it won't go through that process until there's a gigantic crisis that makes it worth it for governments to actually go through the struggle of setting up a new financial system. So as individuals, we can't stop any of this from coming. This is kind of baked in the cake. But what we can do is prepare ourselves and our families for things like, a 1970s style inflation, 15 or 20%, spiking interest rates, extreme volatility in equities, house prices doing extremely unexpected and hard to predict things. And it goes on and on. But basically turmoil is what's coming, and you want to be as flexible and as resilient as possible heading into it. And there's an awful lot of things the average individual can do. So it's a fascinating intellectual challenge to structure your life in a way that makes you the most resilient possible.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And as you say, I think the sanity approach to this is almost to gamify it and just to stop taking yourself and life that seriously and commit to enjoying it and saying, I was born in this era because I have the nous. and the wherewithal to take on a challenge. And I'm not going to balk at it, and I'm not going to get deer in the headlights, fear and anxiety. I'm going to, loosen up, relax, and say, this is the era I am of. It's interesting times. We're living the Chinese curse, and this is how I intend to deal with it. And that sort of framing helps. And I think you've touched on a lot of interesting things. Going back, I suppose, to the financial side, as you said something that really caught my ear, and not enough people, in my opinion, are actually saying. But you said rather to the contrary to official Fed and street expectations of rate cuts, you pointed out the possibility, and this is my why is nobody talking about this, the possibility of immense rate spikes as part and parcel of the debt collapse, which is the other side of the seesaw, which is inevitable because invariably this comes back to a debt crisis, the excessive issuance of new money. And that's why we have inflation and all of that. And how do you sustain the valuations of that? Well, if you don't in the long run, Japan's trying, and you can see what it's done to the yen. So I like that. Can you sketch out for us debt markets, given you were the Michael Milken era, even I think it was the death of the junk bond markets and all that went in. You're a man who understands debt markets.
Yeah, I actually spent a year doing workouts with busted junk bonds where, you sit around the table with the investment bankers and the company and you carve that carcass up to see who gets what. It was a miserable year, but it was very educational, and I think we're headed for something like that again, only on a much bigger scale, because that was a singular bubble, the junk bond bubble. And so was the tech stock bubble, and so was the housing bubble that happened each decade since then. And what we've got now is the everything bubble, where not just one instrument in one corner of the financial system is wildly overvalued, it's going to blow up, it's going to cause a crisis. What we've got is multiple different asset classes that have all been subject to bubble dynamics. They're all wildly overvalued, and they're going to
Yeah.
crash in some kind of sequence. We can't know what the sequence is because one has to blow up and then knock the others down. But that's coming. The everything bubble is going to burst. And because there are so many different pieces to this particular puzzle, it makes it very hard to predict in its particulars. But without a doubt, one of the things, well, actually, not without a doubt, we basically have a choice right now in a very broad sense of two different scenarios. One is the 1930s style debt driven deflationary collapse. The other is some kind of a serious inflation or maybe even hyperinflation. Now, the guys in charge really want the latter, or they're going to pursue that because that isn't an immediate problem. You can kind of inflate your way through a lot of different crises, and that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. But if you let interest rates go up far enough to start breaking the financial system, you drop immediately into a deflationary crash, and the people in charge get blamed for it. So they don't want
Yeah.
to be this generation's Herbert Hoover. So they're always going to choose inflation. They will always bail out industries that are going broke, and they'll always push interest rates down as low as they can get away with, and they'll always create as much new money as possible, which is basically what we've seen happen really since the 1970s. Every crisis has been met with even easier money. Every bankrupt industry has been bailed out. Now we're coming to the point where there's a question about whether the tools that they've used in the past will continue to work. In other words, can you create another $10 trillion of cash, dump it in the system to bail out, say, the local and regional banks in the US? Or will that shift the pressure over to the dollar and then crater the dollar, which is another way of saying, will it spike inflation? And if that happens, interest rates go through the roof. They will no longer be able to keep interest rates down because nobody will be willing to lend money at say 2%, because you're getting back rapidly depreciating currency on that loan, so it's a bad deal. So I think that's where we're headed, and I think it's probably not in the too distant future, just because the numbers are so huge now. If we're going to take on $1 trillion every 100 days, something blows up along the way in the not distant future. So I think that's where we are. We're living through a very interesting part of financial history. Interesting in the old Chinese curse sense. It's going to be
Yeah.
incredibly painful for the average person who hasn't been paying attention and who trusts the government and who has lots of currency in the bank, things like that. And it's going to be fascinating for the obsessives who have been poring over this stuff for years and years. You know, you and I are going to find this more interesting than terrifying, I think. But most
Yes.
people are just going to find it baffling, and they're the ones who don't deserve to be hurt because they trusted the government. You know, they played by the rules. They did what they were supposed to do to get to the next rung on the economic ladder, and that is going to come back to bite them in a terrifying way from their point of view.
100%. I can't find anything there to pick argument with. And when we talk about the everything bubble, I just want to go back to it's not really all the asset classes in the silo. It's the creation of money liquidity through the debt market. It is the debt market that manifests in hypervaluations in anything that has a yield or has any perceived monetized value. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't even have a yield. Gold doesn't have a yield, but we're seeing strong markets in those because they offer potential capital preservation or other alternatives. So we're actually scrambling for a new monetary system already on the basis that the existing one is damaged. And this gets a little bit more resetty. We understand that the people holding the strings seem to be wanting to pour us into the digitized version. However, given their control and the surveillance finance element in terms of how everything is being done on the internet, privacy is not anymore seems to be a virtue that is being respected at a citizenry level. I'm almost certainly cautious of the digitization of everything and wanting a good mix of physical assets. A nice remote farm with good land, maybe a farm manager or help a big equity stake in a big farm with somebody who keeps cows, etc., and has quite a lot of remote space that you can build your own little landlord home on in a private agreement with him while he continues to operate and grows things, feeds animals, seems extremely attractive as a physical aspect of catering to needs in what probably has to also be considered one of the biggest social crises, because it's not just a financial thing. This is what you mentioned, the key word prepping. It's prepping everything. And unfortunately, the great normies that you were referring to that haven't considered the nefarious activities of government and have been naive, and they're going to turn very angry at some point, and they're going to turn very hungry, and they're going to find themselves in some very, very deeply impotent currency that just doesn't do the living standard any justice. And I expect the social unrest with this is going to be extremely high. So I'm feeling this not wanting to be around too many people, and the ones that I am being a closely knit community of almost circling the wagons and lagering out, all of like-minded and probably, hopefully, financial standing. Um, is there any way we're wrong on this and that the digitalization is everything and we should all be just wailing in? And is there any possibility we get a reset and a new financial system without massive amounts of problem reaction solution, a chronic social unrest reaction to essentially the sudden right valuation of everyone to near zero in terms of their currency holdings and even the risks of the great taking? Is there a way around it, or are these things coming at us? What's your take? How would you do the probability breakdowns?
Well, there's no way to do a currency reset without a dramatic devaluation of the existing currency, because that's kind of definitional. You know, that's what a currency reset is when you lower the value of the existing currency and then you implement something that's more stable going forward. So that means that the people who have savings accounts and cash under the mattress and any other kind of financial asset like bank stocks or government bonds, they take a massive haircut. Their wealth is diminished dramatically. And historically, when you do something like that, especially if you do it via a kind of a hyperinflation where the currency just collapses, you get massive civil unrest. You get the French Revolution, and then Napoleon coming to power, and a whole generation of European war, or you get the Weimar hyperinflation in the 1920s that gives you Hitler. So those are the kind of things that are kind of the outliers in terms of risk. That's the really scary scenario. If you have a currency collapse that leads to massive social unrest, that leads to the imposition of a dictatorship, that leads to war everywhere you look, that's completely possible because history says that it's actually one of the normal things that happens in concert with a currency crisis. It doesn't have to be the only way, though. You could just have the people in charge of the global currency system on some Sunday night when all the markets are closed, just announce that the big currencies are henceforth just names for weights of gold, and then we're back on a gold standard. That's still a big devaluation, but it's relatively orderly. So we could see that. But what we're more likely to see is, like you said, everybody being herded into central bank digital currencies, which are basically just electronic means of control. In other words, you'll be given an account at the Federal Reserve in the US or the Bank of England or someplace, and you'll have money in there that you can spend, but they can watch you. They can see everything you do, and they can program your money so that if you're not spending it on the right stuff, you're banned from doing that. Or if you're not spending enough money, it loses value in a pre-programmed way so that if you don't spend it, it evaporates. In other words, they can use these new digital currencies to control us rather than enrich us. And I think that's one of the big risks going forward is that they use the coming crisis in order to impose some version of financial martial law. And then also other versions like censorship via social media and things like that. So we're looking at the setup of a totalitarian state right now. The pieces are being put together, and the question is, will we get to the point where they just flip the switch and we wake up one day and we're in 1984 again or something? That's the very scary part of this. Now, the way you lean against this is to go back to the prepping stuff that we talked about, where you get, like you said, a farm, you get land that grows food, you own precious metals as your money, and you basically learn to handle your own life technically as much as possible. And in that way, you're uncontrollable or less controllable. You've got real money. You're food self-sufficient. You're able to defend yourself, and you're a totalitarian government's nightmare if there are enough of you. Because that means part of the culture can't just be controlled by the would-be dictators that come to power. So that's really our challenge: is how do we, as a society, not just as a few isolated individuals, but how do we shift as a society to being immune to the kind of stuff they're going to try and throw at us? And you basically need to be part of a community for that to work. You can't just be a guy in a cabin somewhere with a couple of shotguns and an AR-15 or something like that. You need to be part of a community where you've got people's back, they've got your back, and you help each other fill in the blanks of your prepping. And it's funny. That sounds like the way we should have lived all along. It's kind of a throwback to maybe the 1950s, I guess, or even further back. But one of the nice things about this kind of speculation is that it leads you to a healthier lifestyle. Even if none of the crazy stuff happens, you're still in better shape. If 10 years from now, you know your neighbors and you trust them and you've got a lot of gold and silver and you're well able to defend yourself. If you can do those things, that's basically what you should have been doing all along. So if this forces you in that direction, then it actually did you a favor. Although I, I don't think there's a really easy, happy ending at the end of this. I think it's going to be contentious. There's a battle coming of some sort, and all we can do is prepare as well as we can for it.
That's a great response about going back to being men of the soil and family people. mothers, fathers, plows, and actually controlling more of your own outcomes and being less subservient to the intermediation of everything, food, uh, service. I unfortunately have become one of these guys that was not particularly good with his hands. I had a father who could fix everything. And, in my generation, you paid workers, you did this, if you became academic, you did that. There was always somebody who did it. And I'm regretting that distance almost from that skill of mechanical nous and handiness and putting up a fence, etc., etc. And in some ways, I'm almost looking forward to being a late student on these rather wholesome type activities and getting again. My big concern, and I might be taking you a little bit into the darker territory, so feel free to comment or knock away as you see fit. But the whole game, there seems to be something more to this digitization, this digital prison, as I seem to see it. And as long as we will buy time, maybe, but will it not be that the AI Terminator robots, a la the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and of course we have the Bolshevik Revolution, where the very successful German farmers that were in the Russian space, that became sort of a middle class, were referred to as the Burgoi, and were removed and stripped of their assets in that sort of Bolshevik communistic ruthless, almost a cleanse of the middle. So is it not just a case of we're going to face this enemy, and unfortunately they're getting bigger and bigger, and they want it all. It's not good enough that they win; they need to see all of us lose. Am I getting a little too black-pilled or into too dark a mire by saying we buy ourselves time only if we do not stand and face them off? Eventually we'll be so small we'll be crushed, if that's not already the case.
Yeah, you're sketching out a realistic scenario. It's a complete possibility that the combination of people in charge who are would-be dictators combined with artificial intelligence and extremely sophisticated military hardware, that's an unbeatable combination, and that there's really nothing that individuals can do about that. But history has many peasant rebellions that won in the end, and I don't think that this one is precluded from happening. It's possible that regular people start to pick up on what's coming, and they vote accordingly, and their votes have some power. We're seeing populist revolutions happen all over the world. Argentina, Italy, France, and
But aren't these
Germany
all
have.
captured? These are captured. This is, I feel, my side, John, that this is beyond a solution that you vote solutions to. The options that you are given are different hands of the same bird, or different wings of the same bird, if they're right or left. Even Millet, in terms of who his mastery is and all of that, a lot of people have been seduced by his almost Ayn Rand-esque comments, etc., etc. But beneath there, there's already a sense of feeling. If you look at the detail of who is appointed around it, these are soliloquies that they cast us. They're poems that they read to us. A seduction, a grand seduction before a rather rough rapage. That's how it feels, if you'll forgive the analogy. In other words, they're just more practiced liars. They know that we are moving ever more to the fringe as we see the core is rotten. And now they are sending new heroes for us to vote for, to keep us approving their game. Voting feels like consent to an approved game where you are choosing the same old master wearing a different mask. Do we not fall prey to that, or was that too cynical?
No, that's absolutely part of the dynamic. We had the same thing happen in the U.S. with Donald Trump, who ran as a populist and then basically brought Wall Street in to run his government. And but that is part of a process of education for people, though. Maybe we have this impulse that the basic populist impulse that a handful of people are screwing the rest of us over, and we try to implement a government that addresses that. And we're optimistic at first. We're very disillusioned eventually, but that just educates more people. about where we need to go. And you know, it's completely possible that this is an unwinnable situation, that we are in 1984 basically forever because of technology. But I think, or I choose to believe that it's also possible that if enough people figure it out, uh, we have numbers on our side. You know, the 99% outnumbers the 1% dramatically. And, you know, the French Revolution, for instance, is one template that, you know, hopefully it just happens in a financial sense rather than an actual beheading sense. But, you know, it's possible that the peasants grab their pitchforks, head to the castle, grab the aristocracy, and pull them out and replace them. So that's a possible dynamic too. You know, it's possible that we win, but you're right. You know, the forces that are lined up against individual freedom for regular people are pretty immense right now. And the crisis that's coming is undeniable. We're going to have a massive financial crisis, and it's liable to be combined with a geopolitical crisis. The way things are working now, you know, especially the U.S., we're stomping around the world picking fights with everybody. I think we're bombing 5 countries now at last count, and the crisis that flows from that is the kind of thing that, when you're also in a financial crisis, leads a lot of people to just want a strong leader to come in, stop the bleeding, and just put the Constitution aside for a little while and just straighten things out. And that's the door that the dictators can walk through. And I think that's a completely possible scenario over the coming decade, you know, or maybe even over the coming year, if a lot of the neocons running the U.S. government have their way. You know, it seems like we in the U.S., our leaders, want World War III, and they believe a nuclear war is actually winnable. And as crazy as that sounds, that seems to be what they think. And that's the thing that scares me more than anything else,
I
because,
don't know if they
you know,
want winnable. I don't know if they even want win. They just want a whole bunch of dead bodies and a reduction of population. That's how it feels from my jaded corner. I see a lot of wars that are just meant to bleed on. And it feels to me something you were saying when you made such an accurate comment, you know, we're in the blow off stage. It also feels like the blow off stage for corruption and stripping all the valuables off the wall on a soon to be evacuated city. It does feel literally that the chandeliers and the grand pianos are being removed by the people that are in control, that there's probably more overt, obvious bribery, corruption, money laundering, trafficking of all sorts of things beyond drugs and humans, but organs and everything else that are just unraveling through these wars that seem to seek to put Slavic blood against Anglo-Saxon blood and reduce the head counts of both substantially without any real net gain. You won't ever say, wow, you know, I'm so glad John Smith and Vladimir so-and-so died for this benefit we all get, and God bless them. There's just nothing. There's no, I mean, there's just this perpetual stalemate, for example, with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And it feels more about the cash flows that enables, the military industrial complex bringing new product online, a bit of beta testing of some things, and carnage and organs being collected. And without getting particularly dark, which I am doing now, so I'll come back from that. But it just yeah, it just feels that it's not even about the winnable. It's just about head count. And I'm starting to buy into the notions of all of these people that are genocidists or eugenicists that actually want, through a variety of means. It's very difficult after, and I don't want to say the phrase because we'll go on YouTube, but the events of March 2020, not to see, at the absolute least, a sort of benign intent, if not an out and out malicious intent, for some of what went on there to be exceedingly damaging and in some cases fatal. So, um, is there any space for us to even trust government anymore? Do we just bug out, and should we be going right now? And how will we defend against the AI bots? Because this is the final question I have, and it's strayed very far from financial. But if the dark if that's the dark way that they're going, and they were going to have so much computing power that we've paid for to weaponize, to have weaponized against us, all this surveillance, all this tracking, all this recording, it's very difficult. We're going to have to leave our mobile devices home. I'm trying to understand, how's my new world looking like to not have these people in our life because I don't trust them with a single thing. And I've got to get physical. So I'll be bartering and I'll be trading with gold and silver. I'll be in a rural place. I'm going to live a simpler life of food, soil, and sunshines and sun ups. But they are going to come in the end. They're going to say your property needs to be registered on the blockchain and you need to declare a value for it. And we will, charge your property taxes accordingly. And if you refuse, they'll strip you of it through a legal process of some form. If you comply, you'll have to, you're going to have to declare a value, and they'll print up those tokens and buy it off you and turn you into a tenant in your own farm. How do we? Is there a? I'm almost of the view is take every day as it comes and live your life to the fullest, because what's coming is in some ways possibly unwinnable. Not absolutely. There's always hope, Hosanna, and all of that. And many people start referring to religions and doctrines. I'm a little bit more circumspect on that. But could we get there? Am I a nuts case?
Well, no, no, we could totally get there. The worst case scenario in all of this is, or there are several worst case scenarios. One is a global thermonuclear war. The other is robot soldiers, marauding across the land, killing our men. And those are possible things. But I choose to believe that there's a path out of this. And the U.S. in this case actually has some advantages in that we're already pretty heavily armed. So it's possible that it's harder to control people who own 10 hunting rifles, or it's not possible. It's definitely true, and that there are enough people in the U.S. that, yeah, if we get to the point where AI controlled robot soldiers are what we're fighting, then yeah, that's probably unwinnable. But if it's the National Guard against Montana or something like that, then I think we have a chance of, if it comes to that. I mean, or if it's Texas, which is kind of things that are happening on the Texas border now are just a couple of
Like laser
mistakes
beams
away
from the
from something
sky,
else.
if I can
Yeah.
interrupt. Sorry. And that's the problem with the weapons. Guns are actually advanced stone throwers, really. Laser beams are next generation weapons. Even when you have an automatic AR, it's still a very advanced stone throwing tool that does, somewhat accurately that you can take someone's life. I mean, when you're in bed and it's a menace in the sky and it's laser beams or things like that, there is a bit of a Star Wars. I don't know if you remember the Reagan era where there was a lot of talk about Star Wars, which was pretty close to the, Star Wars 1, 2, and 3, that sort of 80s, the whole meme. And they were talking about defense, and it was this whole new level of weaponry. And now some people believe that certain fires have been caused. Some are showing us beams that through infrared light can only be seen, and saying, this is not organic. And these are almost, planetary based eyes in the sky that have unbelievable potential to do absolute carnage, for which no shooting rifle is a match. And it's, I feel the only way we turn this is we would need almost militia to seize control over local governments, and right now, because for every day we wait, the anaconda has its fourth coil around our body and is just about ready to start the tightening process. And they only, once they've really captured everything, which in my view is the case, do they start the squeezing. We're already seeing that in some of the utterances that is coming out of Trudeau's mouth. What do you make as the Australia, New Zealand, and Canada as a sort of these new bastions with these boy child leaders that seem to come out with some of the most absolutely uh, totalitarian type edicts and legal bills that they're getting written up?
Yeah, what's happening with or would I be right in describing them as the former UK countries, or is that not
Commonwealth, yes, the
the
word
Commonwealth? Okay,
Commonwealth
the
comes to
Commonwealth.
mind, yes.
Okay, so the Commonwealth countries are just this shock to me because they seemed like bastions of free people not that long ago, you know, and they've veered into totalitarianism almost overnight, it seems, between gun control and forced vaccinations and now speech laws. You can't really call those free countries anymore, and they're setting in place that turnkey totalitarian state, and I can't explain that. It doesn't seem like that it's within the national character of those countries for this to happen that quickly. But again, there is still time to turn around here. By the way, Francis, this is really interesting because normally I'm the guy with the really dark scenarios, and this is a chance to take the optimistic side of the
Yes,
macro
good
argument
for
here,
you.
which I'm enjoying. It's fun to do.
I'm making
But
you fight out of the other side of your brain, and I'm out
yes.
vampiring you. I've got the Sith Darth coat on. No. Carry on, yeah, carry
But
on.
yeah, because okay, because the story that I end up telling is that this is basically an investment thesis. Psychologically, you think of it as a way to get very rich during the crisis, and it's much easier to to keep a good attitude going into it and stay optimistic because it's possible that this is a big short scenario for you where you find just the right thing to invest in. You make a ton of money while this crisis is sorting itself out, and then more or less normal life returns. Except you're one of the rich guys then, and if you keep that in mind, you can get through this
Yeah.
without just being crushed by the darkness of so many things that are happening. Um, and I
Are you, if
prefer
I
to
can
keep
interject
that
again,
point of view.
sorry, I'll interrupt if I can.
Sure.
You reminded me of that Chinese symbol that represents both crisis and opportunity. And I do, in my minor positive moments about the future, do highlight that great wealth will be created in this great collapse. The people like the Big Short, as we saw, you referenced that film, but also in other things, there'll be things going up. I can't help but feel that it's all the ones that you should be buying that are status, that you should be holding your nose and buying the things that are going to help imprison us. So you end up in this bizarre scenario where your life and your freedom will be greatly impeded, but you'll become rich by being early in the investment of your own captivity. So sort of the Meta, Facebooks, the AI, the Nvidia, of course. It is, as crazy valuation as it is, I'm sure Tesla and Nvidia will go up again, and all of these things. Where would you, if I can bend you back maybe to the financial, where would you say if it's your hold your nose, and I sometimes say your FU portfolio, the ones you hate but you think are, if this dark, at least you'll be a rich slave type mentality if you make those investments? Is it the Magnificent Seven? Are they going to continue to be? Are those the ones, and any new things out of it that people should be considering in terms of let's go with my dark Sith type eventual goal? If all of those things are coming, AI has to be it, and the crypto will. And in that, I'm going to bolt another question on there just to make it super confusing for you. Will Bitcoin survive? Because many people are making money once CBDCs are launched. Will they? How will they coexist that people don't dump the CBDCs for Bitcoin as well? So could Bitcoin be one of those things that I see a situation where it could coexist, but most of the elites hold it. But maybe it's too good an option. If they're on the same playing field, it'll disappear. So where do you go in terms of, if we're going statism and totalitarianism in the West, where do you go with your investment money for that theme?
Well, let's spend a minute on Bitcoin because it's such a fascinating subject. Now, it's an emerging asset class, so it's very hard to predict anything with certainty because it's just never happened before. And I love the concept of private sector money based on technology that's beyond the purview of governments. That's a very seductive idea. But Bitcoin has hurdles ahead of it. It's There has to be a use case for it in terms of it being used widely as money, which hasn't happened yet, might happen pretty
Digital
soon.
gold. Let's go with the digital gold. It's too
Yeah,
slow. Let's say they battle with that.
yeah. Well, okay, that's one part, and then the other part is the reaction of governments if Bitcoin becomes a threat. And how will governments try to co-opt and or destroy Bitcoin? Because you know they're going to, right? And the question is, can they succeed? And it's new. I honestly don't think you can say anything with certainty about it, but I think that that's the decade ahead story with Bitcoin is that it has these roadblocks that it has to evade or just burst right through. And we'll see if it does. I think it's going to be a fascinating story, and it's completely possible that a ton of money is made by the people who get it right. And it might even be that the right story with Bitcoin is to short it, and ride it down to zero. And I just don't know. Um, as for what else you should be investing in now, well, you want physical stuff. Things governments can't create more of on a digital printing press. So that's gold and silver, obviously. Gold is going to 10,000 US dollars an ounce easy. Silver is going to be $200 or $300 an ounce as this plays out. So it's possible right there that you make generational money by stacking, by getting a lot of gold and silver in physical form and protecting it, or hiding it well, or whatever. And someday soon, there will be another big short scenario with a lot of the overvalued stocks out there. There are very few undervalued stocks left, other than, ironically, the gold and silver miners. They're
Market, yes.
super cheap. Yeah, they're very cheap by any metric,
Yeah.
any historical metric. But most other things are just they're on the pre-crash level of valuation. So historically, when you have a market like today's market, like in 1999, that's what this resembles, where a handful of one decision tech stocks are elevating all the rest of the world's stock markets. Well, that's usually a recipe for extreme overvaluation, which leads to a gigantic crash. So if history is any kind of a guide, you want to be shorting the NASDAQ in the US at some point, or at least staying out of those stocks at some point. I don't know if this is the point, but there will come a time in the not too distant future when a lot of the big tech stocks roll over. And, in 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, even the Amazons of that sector went down by 90%. So you can
Yeah.
see a lot of these big tech stocks drop by half and just be fairly valued, and there's a huge opportunity there, but it's a one of timing. At what point do you start shorting the Amazons and even the Nvidias of the world? And I don't know how to figure out that point, because these things
Yeah.
just have so much momentum behind them. But the point's out there waiting for some really sharp trader to discover and act on. But I think if you got to have financial assets, and you shouldn't have too many financial assets, because you mentioned the great taking earlier. That's also a scenario out there where they just basically vacuum up all of our financial accounts, and maybe if they're nice, they give us treasury bonds to replace them, and if they're not nice, they just take it all. And so you don't want to expose your entire financial life to things like gold mining stocks, even though they're incredibly cheap. But just because they trade on exchanges, it makes them riskier than just the gold mining business, which is risky enough on its own.
Yeah.
So, I would go mostly physical, as to the
Yes.
extent that it's possible. Own real things, and expect them to go up in value when the currency collapses.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think it's as you started, as you said, gold, silver, remote and self-sufficient. If I were to summarize, and able to protect that which you have in an environment where many will not have.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I can't seem to advance much beyond that. It's been absolutely amazing getting your take, John. I truly appreciate it. So you've written 5 books. If people were starting and just getting to know you and really found this enjoyable, which book or which title? You're welcome to mention more than one, however you wish. Should they start at, and where's the best place to find it? We wouldn't mind tiptoeing past old one world retailer Amazon and buying it direct from your website if such a thing is possible. So you may feel free to tell them also about that, and how to find your Substack again.
Okay. The most recent book, it's from 2014, so it's still not recent, but ironically, it's called The Money Bubble. I co-wrote it with Gold Money's James Turk, who's a big
I
name in
know
the
the name.
gold space. Yeah.
Yes, that's
And,
it.
Yeah, great and a great guy too. He was a pleasure to work with. But ironically, with an investment book, and you can tell from the name, the money bubble, that I'm talking about, the
Yeah.
everything bubble there. With an
Yes.
investment book, timing is everything, because if the things it predicts start happening as soon as the book comes out, then you become a bestseller instantly. It's just because you're so perfectly in tune with the
I'm,
times.
yeah.
Well, this book, it sold well when it came out, but the things that it predicts are actually just now starting to happen. It was that early. It was a decade early, which you never want to do with an investment book. But so it's a decade old, but the book itself is actually pretty well suited for today.
Yeah.
So I still do recommend it. It's available online. I don't have a website that sells them, but you might have to go to
Okay.
Amazon for it. And then I've got a Substack newsletter that is all about actionable ideas for what's coming. So it's basically what we talked about in a little more detail, and with a lot of sources and places to go for deeper information. And so far, so good. It's a 1-year-old newsletter that has, it's collected a very interesting community around it. So I'm finding it a lot of fun, and very optimistic about where it goes, because there's so much left to say about this subject.
Yeah, and we are living through the times. This is actually a case study. I mean, I always say this is the economic case study of all time. The most globally synchronized debt bubble through most of the English language nations, Western nations, and even those that aren't. We're all lepers in a leper colony, and that's why we often don't see the relative loss, or we don't see the valuation loss in currencies, because there's this comparative benchmark of your neighbors and peers that are all actually of the same disease. So if we've all got leprosy, we all think we're healthy relative to the other. And I think it's going to be, we're living in the most fascinating of times. There's real opportunity, and yeah, just time to prepare real hard. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this. And great mentioning it. So it's the Money Bubble, and it is available on Amazon, and it's John Rubino's. So it's John, obviously, Rubino, Rubino, on Substack, for a great community of people, probably quite similar to ours. I'm hoping we'll be able to merge and get a big old militia going, John. But thank you very much for your time and coming on. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Francis. Great talking to you.